Have you ever been puzzled by how JavaScript works, especially with ES6 generators? It can be confusing, right? If that's you, then you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into the mechanics of ES6 generators and answering a common question about the first value passed to next. I totally get it. Generators can be tricky, and it's frustrating when you think you understand how they work, only to find out you're missing something. You're definitely not alone in this confusion. Many developers have faced similar questions. Here's the specific question we're tackling today. A user asked, when passing parameters to next of ES6 generators, why is the first value ignored? They provided an example where the output was x equals 44 instead of 43. Sound familiar? Let's break this down together. So, what's happening here? When you call next on a generator, the first call is special. It starts the generator and runs until it hits the first yield. The value you pass in on the first next call is actually ignored because the generator hasn't yet reached a point where it can use that value. And stick around. At the end of this video, I'll share a quick tip that will help you understand generators even better. To understand why the first value passed to next is ignored, let's first look at how the generator function works. When the user calls next for the first time, it runs the code until it hits the yield statement. At this point, the generator yields the string foo concatenated with the incremented value of I, which is 1. The value passed to next, which is 42, is ignored at this stage. When the user calls next again, the generator resumes execution right after the yield. This is where the value passed to next is used. However, it is important to note that the assignment to x occurs after the yield. Thus, the calculation for x becomes 1 plus 43, resulting in x being 44. This is why the output shows x equals 44 instead of 43. In summary, the first value passed to next is ignored because it is used only after the yield statement in the generator. The user can think of the yield as a pause point where the generator waits for the next call. Fun fact, generators are like a pause button for your functions. They allow you to pause execution and resume later, which can be super handy in many scenarios. Now, let's look at the answers provided by other users. This user explains that when you call next with an argument, the first action of the generator is to feed that argument to yield. However, on the first call to next, there is no yield to receive the argument since the generator hasn't reached that point yet. On the second invocation of next, the generator executes the line where x is calculated using the argument passed during the second call. This is why the output shows x equals 44. Now, let's shift our focus to a different response. This user found it helpful to use if statements in their generator to understand how values are passed. They demonstrated this with a generator function that yields values and logs the input received from the next calls. The first yield returns 1, and when the generator is resumed with an input of 2, it logs that value. This approach clarifies how the first value passed to next is captured and can influence subsequent yields. Now, let's dive into a different answer from another user. This user clarifies that the first value passed to next in a generator is ignored because the generator must execute code before the first yield. They explain that the generator starts with an implicit yield, which means the first call to next only moves the execution to the first yield without using the argument. The user illustrates this with a code example, showing that the generator executes code before the first yield, allowing subsequent calls to next to use the values passed in. Here's the tip I promised. To better understand how values are passed in generators, try logging the values at each step. This will give you a clearer picture of what's happening behind the scenes. And there you have it. Now you know why the first value passed to next is ignored in ES6 generators. Keep experimenting with generators, and you'll master them in no time. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button for more insights.